Welcome to 5 Dubs by MDDC Press. I'm your host, Rebecca Snyder, the Executive Director of the Maryland, Delaware and DC Press Association, which represents news media in our region. 5 Dubs focuses on the who, what, when, where, and why of local news media. We'll talk with the journalists about the stories behind the news. You can find more information about our guests in the show notes or on our website, www.5-dubs.com. Welcome, everyone. I am delighted to have here in the studio Konrad LaPrade, the group publisher of E89 USA, and Andy West, the editor-in-chief of the publication. So welcome to the program, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I wanted to start where we usually start with our member spotlights, which is talking about what you cover and where you cover. So E89 Independent News Media has a really interesting premise in that it's a nonprofit newsroom and has been before nonprofit was cool. But Konrad, can you tell us a little bit more about sort of the areas that you cover and how you're set up?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a for-profit business owned by a nonprofit trust, which is an interesting concept. But what it means is that we reinvest everything that we make or don't make, we reinvest back into the businesses, right? And so that's really cool when it comes to this, rather than working for a company that we're paying shareholders or we're concerned about stock price. We're really able to focus on the local news and what happens. And so as you kind of alluded, when it comes to the publications, we're your local papers in a bunch of communities. So we have our flagship daily is the Daily State News is in Delaware, and we see ourselves as a Delaware daily. We have a lot of readership in Kent County, certainly, but we have readership in Sussex and in Newcastle County as well. But a couple of years ago, as we were looking at our readership and sort of thinking about how to serve the markets well, and Andy and I talk about this all the time, but one of the things that we decided to do, and our company as a whole does this, because we're part of a company that has papers in Arizona and also in Florida. But one of the things that we decided to do is to say, look, we recognize that journalism and reading news is different than it was before. And so we're going to identify local communities where we can mail publications for free to those communities and then sell advertising around it. So we have 4 hyper-local newspapers that are mailed out in a quantity of 10,000 to those communities. So one in Milford, Delaware, one in the Smyrna, Middletown area. Then we recently started a newspaper in the Millsboro, Long Neck area of Delaware, where 10,000 go out to homes there twice a month. And then we also have one in Dover called the Greater Dover Independent, where we send out 10,000 newspapers twice a month to communities there. And then we also have our group of papers in Maryland, the Salisbury Independent, the Chrisfield Somerset Times, and then County Times, and then the Dorchester Banner.
That is a lot of areas to cover. And before we get into sort of how you manage covering all those pieces, I wanted to ask you, Andy, you've in your time with E89, you've done circulation, audience development, of course, a ton of editorial. I'm really interested in that idea of how you look at a community and say, gosh, that needs an independent paper. You're, I think, one of the few organizations that have been consistently opening new publications and expanding your circulation. Can you tell me a little bit about what goes into that divination of where you're going and how you're approaching audience?
Well, sure. It's pretty much so I'll just give you a brief background. I've been on deadline with the state news since 1990, and our daily deadline since 1990. I've aged well, I guess. So when you stop and think about what we do, it all goes back to core values that we have and how we serve a community. What news and information we can offer, how we can facilitate debate in a community. So as we were looking at new publications in our area, and even trying to shore up and elevate some of them that we do. There's obvious places like Milford where we already had a publication that we feel like we can continue to invest in. And then you also look at areas where there's been significant growth in Delaware where hasn't been a legitimate publication there. So the Long Neck Millsboro area that we're now in is just huge. It's booming. And I don't know that I could give you a number, but I would guess a very, very large percent of the people that live there moved to Delaware in the last 10 years. So that's pretty enormous in itself. Middletown is a booming area that's in Newcastle County, north of Dover. And we found that they were crying out for a publication. And it's one of those things where you go around the rotaries and people are saying, we wish we had a publication. And then you start talking about our model and what we do to share information, try to draw people in, find the good in a community. They especially love hearing that, find the good in the community and sharing it. So these have been really excellent pieces for us. And in Dover, obviously we have a daily, but there certainly was a need for, I think, a lot more positive news on a regular basis, and trying to find a publication that was sharing as much information about how to be involved in the community was really important to people. So, and in that regard, it's been a big success.
Well, and I do think that's a really interesting aspect because you all focus on it is hyper local. Like you are embedded in your communities. You know, when from in my where I sit, you know, I tend to deal things with more legislative things or things that are problems. And whenever there's something that crops up in sort of your backyard, Conrad's like, oh yes, I know so and so, or I can feel free to call or know I know the situation. And so I'm really interested in kind of how you keep the pulse of all those different areas, because it's an investment of time and resources to be as hyper local as you are. And I think you also have to be really confident that those are the right places to be, as you
Yeah,
navigate your business.
yeah.
So how do you kind of juggle all of that?
Well, I just love all of the communities that we serve. That's part of it, right? So uh, Delaware and really Delmarva, we're all friends, Yeah, I think that one of the politicians calls us a state of neighbors, and that's really what we are. So you
Mhm.
can, within two or three people, find somebody and a lot of common ground. So that's part of it. But we've done really well to hire local journalists, people that grew up here or wanted to be committed to living in our communities, and that has made a huge difference because with their own families, their roots, they're really dialed into what we're doing. Now we can also look at the other things. What are people talking about on our forums and things like that. That's really helpful. But I think the fact that we're out in the community too. I don't think I've ever been anywhere where there hadn't been somebody approach me and want to talk about one of our publications or the website or something like that. And that has been a real joy. It helps that I've been here so long, but most of my staff, after just a few weeks on the job, start feeling it that way. We are very accessible, so that makes a difference.
It does, and I feel like there was a Pew research paper a couple years ago saying that only like 25% of Americans knew a journalist, and so being visible in the community, I think, certainly builds trust in
Yeah.
what you're doing. But over and above sort of the editorial journalistic aspect of that, Conrad, could you speak to sort of how you translate that hyper local into events and advertising and some of the wraparound pieces that make kind of that community town square aspect of news media?
Yeah, for sure. So just one thing I want to say, and Andy alluded to this, and I just want to kind of say this. I think our not it's community involvement, but it's also people who are committed to making the communities better. And we see our publications doing that. We really do, but we hire people who want to do that in the community. So when you look at Cambridge, Chrisfield, Salisbury, Milford, Dover, right, Millsboro, we're involved in the chambers. In most cases, we have board seats on the chambers. We're involved we're coaching our kids in local sports. We're living, breathing those communities, and a lot of us have grown up there. I mean, I'm a product of the Salisbury, Easton, Trapp area, and moved away and came back and wanted to live in Delaware because of what I'd seen growing up. My parents were in Seaford. It's like there's just this, and that's me. But those stories are around. Like people want to be in these states, in these communities. So, we start there, and then I think the question is, well, how do we make it better? What's missing? Are there things that we could do that maybe newspapers don't do? So, for example, in Dover, we run a Comic-Con. It's the
Oh,
largest.
how fun.
Yeah, it's the largest. It's one of the largest events that occurs in Dover. We've kept our rates relatively low so that we can sell a whole a bunch of businesses that come in and they see it as an opportunity for them to be able to be sustainable for the year. We work with a ton of different people. There's 10,000 folks that show up, and that's just one example of what a newspaper does that maybe is different than some other places, right? That I've been. We also see ourselves as we produce, I think, maybe 12 to 15 additional events kind of throughout the year, one or
Mhm.
two a month in some cases, whether that's focused on seniors, whether we're focusing on a fashion show for women, whether we're focusing on a Reader's Choice Award where we're honoring local businesses, whether we're putting on a networking event or a big festival, right? But we're out in the community doing these sorts of things. And, we see that as a way to strengthen the community too. Um, and we believe that one of the ways that we strengthen the community is by selling advertising to our
Mhm.
advertisers so that their businesses are stronger, so that they
Right.
can compete. And that's a real value for us. And so I've worked for places before where they've said, hey, we want you to be in at a newspaper, but we don't necessarily want you to be on the chamber, or we don't necessarily want you to be involved in the community. We want you just to sell.
Mhm.
What is unique about I is that we believe that the community and involvement in it is incredibly important for our success and the community success. And so, we lend our people out to serve and volunteer, and we see that as an impact. And the businesses that we interact with do as well. They want us around, and that's great. And then we're able to talk because, as you can tell, Andy and I won't shut up when you give us an opportunity to talk about
Well,
our business. And
I'm curious, has I and I always been that community focused, or has that been an evolution? I mean, you have such an interesting Jack Smythe, I think, is the founder, and what a character in Delaware. Did that sort of emphasis on community start there, or did that kind of evolve as the organization grew?
I think it was evident from the beginning. Jack did such a good job of coming to Dover and doing exactly what Konrad and I do now, where we just talk to people, we listen to people, we don't tell people what to think. We're open minded, and I think he did such a good job with on the ground research that we continue to learn from that approach. Some of the things that we do now, of course, we didn't do in their early years in terms of holding events. But they certainly have grown over the years and actually maybe have become refined in some ways where we're making sure we're doing something that is a positive for the community in terms of bringing people together, people and businesses together. So sometimes when you look at things like just the basic sponsorship, um, we're not necessarily going to hang a billboard all over town. Um, it's more about what can we do to bring people together. Um,
right.
in that way. And that's been an evolution, of course, but I think we've been heading in a really good direction in that way.
And I think it shows because Andy, before we started recording, you were telling me that you are adding circulation numbers, and of course you can choose to do that as free publications, but you're expanding, and you certainly don't add copies if they're just getting thrown away at the end of the week. So um, tell me about, and I think that goes against the paradigm or the idea that news media is really struggling. I think in general, we're not struggling for audience. Like people are looking at news media. They want coverage. So talk to me a little bit about that growth of your audience
Yeah,
and what that means.
I think I said this to somebody yesterday, where I feel like we have done as much as we can and probably can do more. We've talked about this idea of availability and affordability of news. I think we're doing really well with that, and we can continue doing that. When you look at just our go to our website, betabaynews.com, we are selling subscriptions now at $5 a month.
Mm.
And what you're getting for that $5 a month is complete access to everything on the site, plus all of our e-newspapers, including the daily. So we've made that very affordable. And, when you try to balance that against the broken model of home delivery and how expensive that is,
Right.
uh, we'll continue, we think, to gain readers, especially as broadband grows in our area. Um, we have some areas in Delaware and Maryland where it's pretty hard to get a signal.
Oh,
So
100%. Hmm.
we'll continue to look at that. But, and I think Konrad will be able to talk about this a little bit better than I. But when you look at what we've done with Dover and Long Neck and Middletown, we're creating products with a better match for small businesses. We've made that advertising more affordable. And from my end, that's important because if we can bring in more revenue, we can sustain the journalism, right? So I think that's really important.
Yeah, it works together. And so, yeah, that small business, I'd love to hear more about that, Conrad.
Yeah, I mean, I think I come from, and you know this, but I worked prior to this at the Gannett Gatehouse World, and then prior to that at Digital First Media, and spent a lot of time in the digital agency space there, as did our digital director Marty Valania, who spent some time at a number of other large organizations too. And so, not only is print really important to me, but and making sure that we have affordable products that are read and looked at by our readers, but we wanted to be able to provide for small businesses just a way to help them both, with their event marketing, with their digital marketing, with their print budgets, as they see that. And what's interesting is that we've put that together. So when a business comes to us right now, we can handle all of your digital, which is great because that's something that affordability wise, that's something that where our prices are a little bit cheaper than a lot of people's are. Our service is really good because we have some dedicated folks who are here who you can go bang on their desk and talk to them. We're handling the work locally, as
Mhm.
opposed to sending it away. When it comes to these mailed products, which is something that I love, while you may look at this and say, hey, my newspaper, someone may look at a newspaper and say, there's not as many ads in here as there used to be, right? But when you open up your mail every day, you have more things in your mailbox than you've ever had before. Direct mail is booming.
Mhm.
And we've come to change kind of our mindset of this a little bit and say, okay, we're selling a newspaper, but we're selling a newspaper that's being mailed for free. And so that then allows us access to a lot of the direct mail customers that have always sort of gone in the mailbox. They're like, well, we don't care about you as a newspaper because we're direct mail and we go here. Well, we're selling a direct mail piece. And I think that mindset change, which is still happening, right? We're a lot of us are old school print people. I grew up in a newspaper family. I've had a
Mhm.
newspaper in my blood forever, and so but we have to kind of think and say, okay, we're not just selling this printed newspaper anymore. What we're doing is we're selling access to a mailbox where people are, with 10,000 of these are going out for free in someone's mailbox. And that is, a different sale. And so, it allows us to kind of turn that around. We can offer a direct mail piece cheaper than anybody else can because you're buying, this product. And so that's been really good to see. And,
Mhm.
as Andy said, our readers have been, we've also had really good results from our readers. People saying, "Hey, we love this. We're very interested in it. We want to get this. How do we get it more often?" And so when we can go back to the advertisers and tell them that, then that also allows it. I mean, it's been a. I'll tell you a quick story, Rebecca. On my street, there's a young family who moved in. They just bought a house here, and we were talking, and I told them what I did, and the young woman said, "Hey, I got that newspaper and I read this story about drug overdoses, and I didn't like what they said, and so she wrote a letter in And again, this is someone who's in her, late 20s, early 30s, writing a letter that we published in the Greater Denver Independent in our product. I mean, that's incredible. That just doesn't, you don't hear that anymore, but people
Right.
want to read a paper when they get it. And, anyway, I'm really passionate about that. I think it's really cool to see. So,
Well, and I love that you're kind of switching that paradigm. I mean, the newspaper is a hell of a lot more interesting than the Valpak mailers that you get. So
right?
if you look at it from an advertising perspective, that is, a terrific, like you're almost guaranteed that somebody's going to open it and read it. And
Right.
coupled with the hyperlocal editorial coverage, just like your neighbor, they're reading things that interest them, that are engaging them into the community. As someone who just moved to the neighborhood, how amazing to feel like she had an outlet aside from like next door or her Facebook post or whatever,
Right.
because people do trust print more than they trust online. And small business is such an engine, but it
Right.
is so hard to get your message out when you're trying to keep hand and mouth together and figure out what you're doing as a business. So
Exactly.
um, I think that's a really innovative space that I think you're in.
And one thing that Andy, and I think Andy, you should talk about this, but Andy's goal with these products is that we have a lot of submitted content. We want the community to take these products and they're their products. Jack Smith, and Andy, you could mention that quote. But Jack, I remember Jack Smith's quote kind of when he started the Delaware State News, I believe. Um, the quote was something like, this is your community paper, and we
Mhm.
want it to be. And I think you've really worked on that as it comes to doing that with these products.
Yeah, and that's so true. I love that we get recognized for this now, and it's a funny thing to me because we've always done this. The University of Maryland had a study a few months ago about local journalism, the health of local journalism. It was a little mind-boggling to me, although I was thrilled to hear this, that our company does amongst the best job in Delaware and Maryland in providing hyper-local news. And the amount that we post on betabaynews.com is just extraordinary. And even something, we have like a free online calendar so people can go on there themselves and promote their own event. But we collect just hundreds of emails every week from people wanting to get some sort of notice and an accomplishment or whatever. So there's no news that's too small. So I think that's what we're here for: solid community newspapers. Now, on the opposite side of that is that we also are a regional daily website and publication. So we have to make sure that we're covering the broader issues, the things that affect the greater population. So we can also say we're proud to say that we're one of the few media outlets, if not the only one, that's at Legislative Hall every day of the sessions.
Mhm.
And because we think that's important. And that's helped us growth wise too, beyond our natural geographic border where we had delivery routes before. So to see more people coming into as subscribers from Wilmington and Newark, which are places we had never had delivery before, that's huge to us. It means that they appreciate the kind of coverage we're doing.
Right.
And not only that, it's increased some of the amount of commentaries and letters that come to us too from a new area. So that's also exciting. And again, you can kind of extend that and say it's your paper. I want the daily and the website to be as relevant to somebody in Wilmington as it is to somebody in Rehoboth Beach.
Well, and
And
certainly legislative news is something that affects everyone,
yeah,
and there are fewer state house reporters. It can be a real challenge,
yeah,
and I'm interested because when we hear like citizen fueled journalism or submitted articles, it sounds like, well, gosh, are there editorial controls? Like who's really how is that news being curated and done? And it sounds like, from what you said, it's more like the accolades, the news and notes things are coming from the public, and then you're sort of handling the editorial tone. Can you talk a little bit about kind of that division and how you manage that?
that's a really tough one in a sense because we do we post and share a lot of material that's submitted to us from government agencies, and we try to do this with a certain amount of care. One of the things is that we know we can't be at every department and agency to follow them closely. So if they're announcing initiatives and they're doing things, we do try to get that news out. It's probably more scrutiny given to letters and commentary than there would be news releases coming from an
Mhm.
agency, and it's just to try to guard against some possible misinformation or misunderstanding, something like that. Um, but yeah, it is a concern. We do have we try to make sure that we have established relationships with the people who are submitting the news too, so that if there is something that we need to question, that we're able to do so. Yeah, and like part of my thinking on it is if the Natural Resources Department wants to share a thing about um, a new project they've got going in a state park, I don't know if I need to scrutinize every element of that. But if it takes up 3 inches in the paper and somebody says, I'd like to go to Denrec's website and learn more about it, well, I think that's important.
Yeah, for sure. And one other piece, Rebecca, and I think we talked about this a little bit, just kind of how do we get involved in the community? What Andy just said there is really important. Every one of our newspapers, we have a local editor and a local salesperson who are involved in those communities. Now, in some
Mm.
cases, they play some other roles for us in the company, but overall, we have a local editor and a local reporter at every one of our papers, and we want them to take ownership, to be the ones who are involved. They're at the chamber events. I my region and Andy's region, we can't cover everything, and we just can't. But we have a really good team that is involved locally themselves, and so that's the thing, is like, it's not just one or two people. We have a group of 30 or 40 people who are involved in the community really deeply, and that's one of the ways I think that we're successful, and that's different than some other places where I've been at, where only maybe the publisher and one
Right.
other trusted person is involved in the community. Here, it's a team effort, and we know it, and it's something that our team believes in.
Well, and I
No,
do like the idea of that local editor, assigned to kind of each area rather than like, oh, here's your local editor that's covering three towns. You can't possibly get the kind of entrenchment. Like I think back, Greg Bassett was such a huge force in Salisbury, and to have him as the Independence editor, I think was really powerful and kind of helped launch that space.
oh, sure, sure.
For
I
sure.
was going to say, add that, if you consider that we have 3 weekly publications in Maryland, Salisbury, Chrisfield, and Cambridge. Out of that, journalist wise, we have 2 full-time and 2 part-time people. And you cannot fill a weekly newspaper without the community's help.
Yep.
Right.
And all 3 of them they do a wonderful job of collecting material from, and, to have folks that understand, don't say no to people. We got to figure out a way to help get their news out. And I just think it's great. And I think, I want to applaud your efforts, Rebecca, for guarding legals and public notices in Maryland, because I think that's important. But when you think about all that we're offering in those things with just a handful of people, it's huge. And if we're helping guide people to information that is helpful in their day-to-day lives, on such a shoestring budget, if you will, it's a very efficient budget, I probably should say. I think it's great.
Well, and I think it also, we want to have all the things that people need in one place, and certainly when we talk about transparency in government and things like that, sure, all the different agencies can put their press releases out and put their information out and whatnot, but then your average citizen has to go to like 20 different sites and just on spec to think, is something worthwhile happening on this site today that I need to know about? And so I think you all have done a really great job, a very interesting model of curating that information and pulling it together in a way that it is kind of like a one-stop shop for individuals in their communities. So as we kind of think through and wind up, I wanted to better understand what you guys are thinking of next. So you've just launched a new publication, you're growing. What are your plans for the next year? Anything on the
Yes.
horizon?
So just to say it, in the last year, we've launched 3 new newspapers, and I'd love to be in this same position where we talk to you next year, and we've launched another 3 or 4 brand new publications. I think for us, um, that's going to be it's really important for us as we identify those communities and we see those areas where there is a need. One, there's a need for print, and 2, there's an involved local growing community. So, we really see our organization as the prime news source in Delmarva, and we want to be able to continue to do that. So, whether that's whether that's launching some new events, which we do have some really cool events that are coming up, which we'll be doing some of that too. But we really see sending out our newspapers as an important thing, and we want the community. We want to identify communities that make sense. And Andy and I have a list that we've sort of had in our back pocket of places we'd like to go, and we'd love to hear too from our readers, because the reason we're in Middletown right now or in Millsboro is people came to us and said, hey, it'd be really great if we had a paper like you have in Delaware or in Dover, if we had a paper like this in Millsboro or in Middletown. And we said, okay, let's do it.
We can do it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's our goal, right? And Andy, I don't want to speak for you, but that's where.
Yeah, no, I think all those are important. But one of the things that I'm hopeful that we can really build on is we have such a broad area that we're in, is finding the stories that matter to all of Delaware or all of Delmarva, and using our pool of journalists to contribute to that type of reporting. We've got more reporters now than serving the daily and the website than we've had in several years. So from that aspect, I think we could do more. I don't think that there's ever going to be a time where people don't crave a better understanding of an issue. So if we can get in there and do more of that, I think that will set us apart in a way.
Absolutely. And I like the idea of you taking that sort of hyper local focus and then providing context of what's happening in the region or the state to really help people understand sort of how it all fits together. And that sounds like a unique opportunity. And I can't wait to talk to you next year when you tell me you've launched, 3 more publications that are doing fabulous new events. I love the idea of the fashion shows and the events that really are community driven, as opposed to here's another awards event. It does feel infused with community, and that's a wonderful thing. So, if people, for those that are listening along, what is the website that they go to learn more about you all?
It's betabaynews.com.
Okay, so betabaynews.com. We'll try and put that in the show notes. And it was a delight to have you both. I really appreciate it. I hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks, Rebecca. Talk to you soon. All right, bye.
Thanks for listening to 5 Dubs with Rebecca Snyder. Please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts so that others can find us. What do you want to know about local journalism? Email me at rsnyder, SNYDER, at mddcpress.com. Interested in supporting our podcast and journalism? Please donate to our 501c3 Press Foundation. Find out more and see the full episode list and show notes at www.5-dubs.com.